Welcome to the Gifted Neurodivergent Podcast, a podcast dedicated to the exploration and cultivation of the outside genius found in neurodivergence.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Gifted Neurodivergent Podcast. My name is Lillian Skinner. Today I want to talk about obesity and neurodivergence because I believe there is a link. And the reason I believe there is a link is that while I have never been obese, I have struggled with my weight while I was in the system, and it was constantly yo-yoing based on the stress I was under, but mostly based on the captivity I was under. Even when I was on ADHD medicine in the system, I was still all over the place. And I know plenty of people who have ADHD and are obese, and I actually know other people who have obesity and they have siblings who have autism or siblings with really severe ADHD. And I believe that there's a link because we have high sensing and high cognitive intelligence, and we don't really talk about that sensing intelligence. We just pretend it doesn't exist. Like it's a whole part of our body intelligence. All of the data we get in through our high sensing or through sensing period is just not considered. And that is the 3D portion of our lives. So we've taken everything in the world and we've made it cognitive, and it takes it down like a flat picture. But the world is not flat, and people are not all the same. And when I had that story about being the same and like you killing yourself to be that blonde-haired, blue-eyed, white person from the 1950s, I gave you the story of my mother-in-laws about who both were other ethnicities and darn near killed themselves to look white. Particularly my mother-in-law who was Chinese. When I tell people, did you know she was Chinese? They're like, holy crap, no, but now I see it. Because she dyed her hair blonde and she wore these big Coke bottle glasses and you couldn't tell. But then when you knew, you're like, oh, of course they are. But that is fascinating, the amount you will change yourself to fit in. And I just call that the box. I think a lot of our neurodivergent issues are that the box we had that they created in the 50s, that was created by the school system they set up in the 40s, that is the Prussian education system. If they did that in Germany, most people were white in Germany, so it was a little different. But they did in America, that's not the case. We have a lot more diversity here, and we have a much bigger population, and well, they just threw out the creatives, because the creatives are essentially the 3D thinkers of the population. They put them into the school system. If you could not adjust to just receiving information and regurgitating it, you actually had to be a person who created, a person who had their own thoughts. You were not considered important. You were actually a risk to the system. And I am definitely one of those people that's a risk. My dad's family, huge risk. My mom's family, not a huge risk, but not valued. So my mom has a bunch of creative people in her family. They're all very good at things, but they don't necessarily cognitively realize it. It means that they do not pose a threat to the system, but they also aren't of value. So they weren't actively oppressed, but they were not also cultivated. So my mother's family has a lot of obesity, it has a lot of sort of sadness, but it's not the family they're not beating each other, they're not kind to each other, but they're not nearly as abusive. My dad's family cognitively realizes it. My dad's family was oppressed like crazy. I mean, they're insane, and the beatings and the stuff like that, all the trauma that comes out of his family, I really truly connect to the fact that they were savants, they were highly creative, and they could realize it cognitively, and every time they went into the system, I mean, my grandfather went on scholarship, my uncle, my father, who failed 12th grade because he failed his English class, and he had to graduate later than his class, went on to be a community college professor. Because my sensitivity is so high, I feel like I've lived many lives. In the time I've lived, I have run up against everything. Because I'm such an outlier, I pretty much spend every moment of every day of my life noticing that I don't move through the world the same way. Noticing that there is a gap between me and wondering what the gap is and trying to connect it. I mean, this has been sort of my life mission to figure out what the hell is so different about me and everyone else, because I grew up with parents who were highly neurodivergent and they were constantly reacting to the world. It was a surprise all the time. And I was like, why are you not mapping that and getting in front of it? And I remember telling my mother, why are you so reactive? Why aren't you proactive? And I was 8, I was 10. I couldn't understand why my mom couldn't get in front of it. But I realize now that part of it's trauma, part of it's our school systems, because she didn't learn it. And our school systems hands you everything to do next. Now go to the bathroom, or now go get a drink. Now go eat. Now do math. Now do English. There's no thinking involved in our school system. There's just receiving and regurgitating. There's just doing what you're supposed to be doing and being a good little boy or girl. I see this in my mother especially. She does not have her own thoughts, but she needs to create. She has this burning desire to create. So she goes into the woods and she picked up plants and brought them home, and she made beautiful gardens. She was like creating, and she made this like beautiful world and life, but she was constant in turmoil and agony, and it was just bleeding out of her. One of the reasons I can't talk to her is that I cannot be around her because I feel like I have borderline personality disorder, because I am just that much of a sensitive empath that I cannot separate my emotions from hers. My whole being disappears. It just takes a back seat because my job in life as a child was to meet my parents' needs. So I didn't get killed. So they didn't lose their mind on me. When I was a kid, I thought I had BPD. And when I moved away at 18, it went away. But I do realize that I have to protect myself. I cannot be around people who are dysfunctional. Most people I know that are creative, they have a deep sadness in them. And in the profoundly gifted groups, I find this too. There is this deep sadness. I really can't be around it because I just absorb it, and then it's my sadness. And we talk about existential despair, and we talk about all these things, but we don't actually figure out why these kids are suffering it. It's because they're so sensitive. It is because their bodies are just giant antennas for the world around them. It is what makes the patterns that makes my family savants. It is that. I just want to point out right here how this also impacts families where the most sensitive child is freaking out all the time, and I'll bet you $1,000 that most sensitive child is actually just feeling everyone else's pain, and they can't rid themselves of it, and they can't leave the family, and then they go to school and it's there, and they come home and it's there, and it's just compounding in them, and everybody's like, what is their problem? They need to fix that. They send them away to those horrible camps that like abuse them and to basically torture them. They force them into going to the military. They throw them out as soon as they're 18, and those people are me. I just happen to be slightly more in control of my emotions. But in my family, I was the bad kid. Even though I was the one doing most of the work, even though I was the one being the parent to everyone, I was the bad kid. So we should really go back and check ourselves before we wreck ourselves with our family situations, because I can see over and over and over again in people out there who were considered the scapegoat of the family, and the whole family's like, well, if you were just a better person. It's like, they couldn't have been a better person. They weren't reacting to their lives. They were reacting to your life. I learned growing through the school system, the whole purpose that seemed to go through the school system was to break you. It was to break you in body or break you in mind, depending on what kind of person you were. And I think the military does a really good job in enlisting people. Like when I talked about the Egyptians, the ancient Egypt, they separated cognition from the emotions, right? So the emotions are kind of like the body's intelligence, and then the brain is your thinking intelligence. But the cognition is really only the present. Your emotions actually bring up your past, and that helps you see the future. I have really high emotions. I also have really high thinking, and I am really good at foresight, and that's why. So those two, when they connect, you have foresight. You can see the past, you can see what's going on in the present, and you can predict what's going to happen in the future. And that's why it's important for us right now to understand our sensing intelligence, because we are going to have a really scary future, and we need to know this. We need to know what's coming, and we need to start getting back in touch with our animal sensing intelligence. Animals run through the world like this. If you take this away from an animal, you're basically taking a dog and you're putting a dog in your life. And I have dogs. I've had a bazillion of dogs, and they stare at you and are like, what to do next now, mom? What to do next now? Boss or master? Like they just wait for you to figure out. It's very annoying. Like, it's very annoying to have your dog sitting there going, I'm such a good boy. What shall we do now? I love my dogs. They do sleep 15 hours a day. That's a great thing. They are I'll go for a walk now. That is sort of how my children are when I put them into the school system. And then when I pulled them out, we'd go through this period where we would get out of that. I know for me, when I was living this anxiety, constantly looking for all the cues, like, what could I do now? What should I do now? I didn't have my own world that I was building. I was too busy worried about everybody else's world. That's codependence. That is extreme egoism. And I have that. Now, I don't have it in an unhealthy manner, but I am wired for that. And I had it so high, it came up and was like very cognitively clear to me that these people are infecting me with their mental illness. They're infecting me with their mental anguish, and I couldn't do it. In order for me to finally get my own life, I had to break away. But on the flip side, that sensitivity saved my daughter's lives. It saved their lives because they were struggling as brand new babies, and I knew it, and I didn't listen to the doctors. The babies basically communicated to me, and I knew it. And this is what I think autistic nonverbals really have to an extreme degree. They have this nonverbal communication. It is sensing intelligence, and we need to start understanding this. And I came up with this little formula I thought was valuable. And I'm not saying that it's perfect, and I'm not saying that it's accurate, and I'm not saying that it's not. I'm saying that this is what I came up with, and I want you to think about it and get back to me and tell me what you think. This is the way I break it down. Those people who are neurotypical, cognitive brain in neurotypicals will break before the body, the sensing intelligent will. And so you go into boot camp and they push you as hard as they can push you mentally and physically so that you're sleeping and eating. They keep you on a razor thin edge of existence. And people's bodies will actually come up for that, but their brains will break. And then they rebuild your brain and they have the perfect warrior. They have a perfect soldier, somebody who will not think, but go and do what they're told. And that's what our school system starts you off. And that's what our military finishes you off. And we have a military industrial complex, and they're very effective because of that. I know so many brilliant, sensing intelligent men who end up in the special forces because they have ADHD or something. They didn't know, and so they went in and they're torn down and they get rebuilt back up again. But if you have autism, you get kicked out. And if you have ADHD and undiagnosed autism, you get kicked out. So it's like this little fine line. I know so many special forces of working in emerging tech, and they all have ADHD. Every last one of them is ADHD. Now, the sensing intelligent body, they break for neurodivergence. That breaks before the body does. And this is for people who are college professors. I swear to you, especially in community college. I took community college classes. All of my children have taken community college classes, and we actually prefer it to the universities. Now, don't get me wrong. There's plenty of neurodivergent professors in the universities too, but the neurodivergents in the community college are my favorite because they're slightly more neurodivergent, and the university system has more neurotypical. I find the teachers are better. They use 3D. They use the big picture. They start at the top and they work their way down, or they make it a whole unit. And they're just not regurgitating, now remember this, because that is a very neurotypical brain that remembers that chain of things, but not the true picture, not a tree event of all of the ways it could go down, and connects it to your other subjects and makes it so that it fits in your brain forever. And you can use it. The whole idea of our education system is to make it so you're almost addicted to it. And so you learn this thing and this thing and this thing and this thing, but it's not actually usable. It keeps you in this narrow focus. And so you're not thinking. What happens is you go into our education system, and if you're a cognitive person, if you have high cognition, you're going to put your body on the back burner and you're going to feed your brain. And I know this because I have autism, and I have autism to the highest degree, and I have every learning difference in the world, but I am very aware my body and my brain communicate. I have savant level connection. So I was always aware that I was sacrificing my body for my brain. I used to not eat. I used to eat only certain foods, like sugar-rich, high-fat foods, and I would eat them first thing in the day. My mom used to make these donuts. They weighed a pound of fat and sugar, and I'd eat one of those before I would go to school. And then I would not eat all day until 9 p.m. because it got me enough energy to get to school. And then when I stopped eating, then I would actually have higher dopamine because my body would sort of start cannibalizing itself. And then I'd go to sports, and then they would sort of throw me off. I was constantly about to pass out all the time, but I would go to this certain point, and then I would have all these kick-ins of dopamine because it was like, all right, you're going to die. We're going to throw something in there. It was crazy. I mean, the things I had to do to survive, it has made me very strong. I am a very mentally strong person because my body and my brain have been battling it out in an insane degree my whole life. This is what Elaine Aron's talking about, the resilience of the highly sensitive. I also think this is what Viktor Frankl was talking about, his time in the concentration camp. You are already battling yourself all the time when you're this sensitive. And so when you're put into a situation where everybody's experiencing it, you already have a lot of practice at it, and you rise to the occasion. That's amazing that you can rise to the occasion because you have gone through so much and you've already experienced that. But who the heck wants to be that? I did not sign up for that. Nobody asked me if I wanted to be that. I did not choose to be super resilient, lesson learned. That was really hard. I could have also killed myself. And there's a huge risk there. And we do this to people all the time. And it's like, oh, how sad. But our society is putting this pressure on us without any regard for the fact that we're going to survive because they just don't care. I feel like I lived about 10 lifetimes in just my childhood. I had to choose. Like, which one are we going to be? Are we going to feed the body today? If I had a game, we fed the body. Are we going to feed the mind today? If I didn't, we fed the mind. And I went back and forth. And luckily, school was pretty slow paced and I didn't really actually need to pay attention in class. So I just sort of was able to do that. Did I get great grades? No, but I was a solid B student and I still got into college and all that. There's plenty of other people, though, I think that were brilliant out there that might have been slightly more body or slightly more brain, and it might have thrown them off and they wouldn't have been able to get through it. And they're probably smarter than I am. And I think that's a damn shame. But I think we should be aware that we have savants out there who have incredible talent, and we have literally destroyed them. We have done that with my dad. You did that with my sister. They struggle. They struggle in the system because their brain's slightly less cognitive than mine and slightly more sensory because they are musicians or artists or something. And I think that's a horrible sin. I think it's an atrocious thing. And it's all in the name of making the system 2D so they can control how you think and move through the world. Now, let me talk about what it is to be 2E, because I just talked about what it means to be neurotypical, which was your mind will break before your body. And these are my definitions, so they just go as far as me. You can agree or disagree, it's up to you. And neurodivergent, which is where your body will break before your mind, like your body will give up. And then we'll talk about the 2E. The 2E for me is the high sensitivity in both, and you have all those syndromes. And I'm going to talk about the syndromes next week. I'm going to talk about mast cell activation syndrome. I'm going to talk about Ehlers-Danlos. I'm going to talk about the mitochondrial dysfunction. I'm going to talk about POTS. We talk about allergies as well. And there's two that I'm going to put out next week that are both really long that I did with Irene Gottlieb, who's a profoundly gifted school director. She started a school for the profoundly gifted, and she's like, half of my students have allergies, half of my kids have these things. This is rampant in here, and we just pretend it doesn't exist. But this is the cost of our schedules. This is the cost of our systems, of the cost of the poisoning of the environment. This is the cost of not allowing these people to move through the world as they naturally are. They're just expendable. Well, now the end of the world is possibly here and we're not expendable. So they're like kind of dabbling into like figuring it out, but not really. And that makes me mad. That makes me upset because I'm one of those people they just chucked out. Now they're like, oh yeah, hey, well, you're too old. We'll go for the younger people. So they're sort of bringing my kids back, but they're also oppressing them every step of the way. I don't think that's okay. But also they're not still trying to figure out our sensing intelligence. They're not still trying to figure out how you use it. But my brain wraps around that like it's a cookie. But I understand this because I have 3 children who I've watched grow, and I'm a savant and I love it. I can see your talent in you. And I don't know what you call that. I don't really care. What I do know is that they have been doing it wrong. And so what I'm trying to do is give you guys a new way of seeing yourself. If you are 2E, you are the top of the ladder. 2E means you have both exceptions. You're both sensing intelligent, gifted, and you are both cognitively gifted. And right now, they don't even recognize us as gifted. They sort of do, but it's not really true. We're so out of the charts gifted. I can't even pass the gifted tests. I can't even pass those things. And yet the instructor will say to me, yeah, I know that you're gifted. There's no doubt in my mind that you're gifted, but they have to do these special tests because I'm just outside of them. And that is autistic intelligence. They say, oh, it's oppressed. It's oppressed massively. That should be an indicator. But no, let's talk about that for a second, because I run into people thinking I'm insane because I'm talking on a level they do not understand. I think of it with the stories like Aesop's fables or any of the parables, all of those stories, they have such multiple meanings that when you're a little kid and you hear it, it's like, oh, that's really nice. The fox tricked this animal and that worked out nice. And don't hang out with fox, I guess is the meaning. But then later you're like, oh, this represents humans and this means this. And when I see that pattern, go. But there's so many levels on all stories and they make them very simplistic. And I think the Princess and the Pea story is the one that I'm probably going to use for this one because it was like, how did you choose a princess? Because I guess in the past, they probably chose them from the regular population because there just wasn't a big enough population. And they have these stories like the Princess and the Pea. Well, how do you pick a princess? Well, a princess is somebody who's really, really sensitive. Why the heck would that be? And why would you put a pea in her bed? And why would that matter? Well, trust me, as someone who has Ehlers-Danlos, that pea would hurt. I am that sensitive. It is insane the level of discomfort I have in a lumpy bed. But there's that level of sensitivity in the people in the world, and it used to be valued. They wrote stories around it. I guarantee you, all of the Disney princesses are based on autistic girls. Those girls are multi-talented. They're all 2E girls. And we have forgotten that. There's a bunch of people out there who are prodigies that do not get cultivated if they're born into poverty or they're born to parents who don't know how to handle it. There are some, though, that do. And I was watching this show and it was talking about child prodigies and whether or not they make it. And it was all on the musical prodigies. There was no math. There was no science in it. The emotions prodigies like me, we don't exist. The humanities, they don't want people like me coming in and messing the whole system up. So I just get completely destroyed, told I'm stupid, not valuable. And my daughter who has a math prodigy, she actually can go through the system. She's sort of noticed. I think my husband probably went through this too, where he was allowed to work. They just gave him the lab and were like, here, go to town in chemistry, go to town in physics. He just got the maths. But I didn't get that because I am still highly creative. I have technically dyscalculia, even though I got through math and then I got a math-based degree. I didn't get cultivated in the way I was, so I just had to figure it out on my own, and there was no math people around me. So we're missing out on really brilliant children because the system is on this 2D thing. And the parents who have produced prodigies, they put their whole effort in. That's what I did. I put them all in to figure out what they're. But I am not putting my child in to win. She's not going there to be super, because what they don't tell you is that the theorist, which is what I am, which was what my daughter is, we don't really show up in that way when we're children. So the people who are the most amazing savant prodigies, they're actually not probably the ones that are rising to the top, because they've made it into this big giant competition and contest. The most gifted people don't do competition. I do not compete. I don't like it. I am too much of a one-way processor. It's like it's either coming in or it's going out. That's why I do a podcast. It can come out. I'm an emotions savant and I take in too much. My sister, she can stand and sing in front of a crowd. She can play in front of a crowd, but she doesn't want to be on that constant going, traveling, everything. She'd lose her mind too. So she's now a poet. We are missing out on really probably the most talented people out there because we have this insistence on competition and this driving, working all the time. So you're getting like second tier savants. You're actually probably getting like the talent savants, prodigy, but they're not the highest level. And I'm not saying I am either, because I don't think I'm the highest level prodigy. I don't think that at all. I think there's probably people who are way more talented than me, and we have this stupid calibrated system so that we don't get them because they don't actually want us coming up, because we would be powerful. We would be the people that they saw all that talent in from the past, and they only give that to the rich now. But when I'm talking to people, a lot of times they think I'm talking simplistically, and we get told like we're childlike. And we are childlike in our learning. I mean, I take in everything. I don't care what the world says about what is right for that. I have my own ideas. That's why we're weird. That's why we move through the world weird. We're different. We're different because we have our own patterns that we develop, and we move through the world authentically on those patterns. And that's why we're also the future, because guess what? We already know how we move through the world. We already know how the world moves. We know how it operates. We are paying attention to that all the time. And we are already reacting to it. And so when we show up at a place and it's a bunch of average people and they're like, hey, this is how you're supposed to interact. And you're like, no, I interact like this. And they're like, oh, there's something wrong with you. And they move away because they've been taught to be afraid of anyone who does not do what the script is that they were taught in school. They want me to be like them. They can't even see where I'm at. That's okay, because now that I have labels from other people, I know how to find people like me. That's why I did this podcast. So let's talk about what happens when you and I, who need both our brain and our body functioning together, being connected, being one, to move through the world in a healthy manner. What happens when we don't do that? Well, our body gets a bunch of syndromes, like I have 4, and our mental illness comes up. Now, I just talked about how I was so porous I couldn't not feel my parents' borderline personality disorder, but I didn't actually get it. Thank God, I'm an emotion savant, and my brain, my sensitivity at my body level actually pushes me to healthy, and I have no choice. And when I got there, I was like, oh, this is so amazing. I don't know why everybody can't see this. I'm really sad. And when I wasn't there, it was horrible. This is so obviously because our system. This is so obviously because they made my parents feel so bad about themselves while they were growing up. There was something so wrong with them, so deeply flawed, and they're constantly doing that. And I've talked about it with my daughter. She's in a really nice school, and yet her teacher's like, check yourself before you wreck yourself with the kids every darn day. When they said, what could you change about yourself right now? And she's like, nothing, I'm fine. They meant, dear gosh, they meant, is your crisscross applesauce good enough? But she's like, I'm fine. I don't need to change myself. And I'm glad that she's that healthy. But that's how they talk to your children. That's how they talk to us. They're constantly asking us in our reviews at work, our peer reviews, our employee reviews at school, what is wrong with you? You tell me what's wrong. There's everything wrong with me. There's nothing that was right with me according to the school systems. And yet I managed to get through them and I did fine. And I managed to make a career, 3 careers actually. And now I'm on a 4th one and I'm fine. I am the most flexible person you ever met. And yet by the standards of the system, I'm not right. I'm not right because they want all the beautiful creative things I can create. And they don't want to give me anything in return for that other than like, here's a few bucks right here, right now. Now get lost. And that's what I see over and over again with the most brilliant people I know. And I'm sick of it. And I don't want that to happen to my children. I don't want that to happen to you. I don't happen to your children. I see this way of moving through the world. And if I am not allowed both of my ways, and I'm not allowed to meet the needs of my body, and I'm not allowed to meet the needs of my brain, I have manifestation of these syndromes I have. Now, these syndromes have a purpose, if you ask me. I use them now that I'm out of the system as sort of like a buffer, like how much can Lillian's body and brain handle? I'm sensitive. I can't do too much. I cannot be in a day-to-day sort of thing without it costing me my life potentially. But on the flip side, I take in so much, I see patterns, and I know what's coming. I don't know. I mean, that just seems a pretty decent trade-off. I really see this as a princess in the pea. Why was a princess so sensitive? Why would they even desire to know? Why would they stick a pea in her bed to try to figure this out? Well, I'm going to guess it's because she was similar to me and many other people who had extreme awareness. And a princess having extreme awareness means she's a better leader. So that's why that's there. But they don't ever say that because that's a 2D world and that story doesn't have context. Well, I'm giving you some context. Now, I see this connection between the obesity and the cognitive higher level. I see it through ADHD. I see it with autism. I was talking about how with my autism, I was using food and starvation and going back and forth to focus with my brain or renew my body. I was passing out left and right from POTS and having seizures because I wasn't sleeping enough. It was pretty bad. But I made it through because I don't have it too badly and because I figured out ways to work it. And because my parents went from highly controlling to almost extraordinarily permissive when they divorced, I had enough leeway that I could figure out how to do it because nobody was really checking on me. So I got my downtime I needed and I survived. But it wasn't pretty and it wasn't good. And I was in and out of the hospital. I was constantly sick. I had asthma, allergies, everything you name it. And as an adult, those have mostly gone away because now I have control over my life. I have control over my schedule. I have control over my cognitive abilities and my body. And I feed them and nourish them and take care of them in the way I need to. I've been asking people, do you think that there's a connection between your obesity and your cognition? And they're like, I don't know. That's a good question. And then they start telling me all these horror stories about their emotions and their pain and their obesity and how it's like linked between their emotions. And I'm like, dear God, yes, I can totally see this. And I'm not alone. Our world is so cruel. I talked about my mother-in-law, like changing her appearance so drastically, people didn't even know her ethnicity because she needed to fit in that bad. And it was that important. She was willing to sacrifice her eyesight for it. So this is where obesity comes in because 2E is a sliding scale and it's sliding into neurodivergence. And those of us who are able to fit in the system, we fit into the system, but you can tell our neurodivergence, if you ask me, this is my opinion, it's not scientific, this is my personal opinion based on what I've seen, is if you ask me the people who are successful in the system, those I find to be the most successful, the most valuable, the most intelligent. They're a lot of times very heavy, they're obese, and they are killing themselves and trying to serve everyone, and they're constantly being let know that they're not enough because they're not attractive. They're slowly dying trying to stay in the system, but yet their cognition is high and they are good at their jobs, and so they're allowed the space to be there. They're allowed to join the ranks of the other ones. And I see more and more people who are executives that are obese. And I just think every time, like, this person's neurodivergent and they don't realize it. This person is killing themselves to try to fit into the system. They have like these extreme highs and lows with their eating. They're going through the same thing I went through to fit into high school, but it's not as extreme as mine because maybe they're not as high in their 2E as mine. But if you're in the system and you're struggling with your food and you're never allowed the chance to get out, you're never allowed the chance to figure out how you naturally eat, what you're naturally eating, like go through the diets that I'm going to talk about in the next session, then yeah, obesity seems a likely destination for you to end up in if you didn't even start there, if you didn't make that into high school, because you're constantly eating reactively rather than proactively because they don't give you the space to eat any other way in our system. And yet they blame you. They make you internalize that there's something wrong with you for you being obese. You just need to take personal responsibility for your body. But yet they want you to constantly show up on their schedule. But you can't really take personal responsibility on your body if you're not on your own schedule, if you're not allowed to be what you're naturally supposed to be. You aren't being given the choice to figure out who you are fully at a body level and move through the world as you need to be. And they make you internalize it just like they do with that elementary school example over and over and every day. And the stories that people told me when I asked them made me sick. They made me want to cry. But I know I had that same thing. I know that Every day of my childhood, I was let know that there was something wrong with me. I needed to fix myself and I needed to figure out how to be normal, and I'm not. And there's no way I'm going to figure out something if I'm not it. If you're not normal, why would you have to figure out to be normal? Why wouldn't you figure out how to be yourself? Why is that such a sin in our society? Because then you're not a good slave. Then you're not a good little worker. Then you're not a person that's being manipulated into giving up literally everything to just make your money to fit into the system. And we're to the point now where so many people are obese. It's like 40% of the population, 50% of the population. In every other country's rolling it out, where they have this school system they've implemented and they have obesity as an issue. And it's like, why are we not connecting these two things? It's the schedule of our system. It's the disgusting level of our lack of self-care that our system never teaches us how to have. And I truly believe the closer you get to that system ideal, the crazier it makes you. Because my parents are pretty close to that system ideal. They're both tall, they're both light-eyed, they're both pretty, they're attractive, they're athletic, they're musical. They're many things, and yet they have borderline personality disorder. And I'm trying to figure out why. I'm trying to figure out why they didn't have to go through what my mother-in-law did. They didn't have to go through what many minorities did. They didn't go through nearly as much, and yet they're further away from themselves than others. And I was like, why is that? And so I've been on this journey to figure it out. And I'm not alone in being able to see this. In 2002, they did analysis in the Journal of American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, and they painted this very concerning picture of this association between ADHD and obesity. And they were talking about this isn't just with the socioeconomic factors and physical activity. There are definitely certain things going on here where we have strengths between neurodivergent conditions, the creativity, the intensity, curiosity, but they're affecting the metabolism, obviously, or they're affecting the eating, or they're affecting whatever they're choosing to eat. They found another 2019 meta-analysis published in the International Journal of Obesity suggesting that dopamine-driven pathways are crucial for motivation and focus in ADHD people because we're just more sensitive. We take in and our body feels it right away. And that's what I'm going to talk about next week too when I go over how the allergies, we are so much more in touch with our body. We're so much more in touch with our environment. And this is going to be needed in our near future as our environment tries to kill us. But right now, we pretend it doesn't happen. We pretend that the environment's not a factor. We pretend that our sensing intelligence is just not there. And that denial is killing people. That denial is why so many kids are diagnosed with ADHD. If we didn't have that, if we let that child actually figure out how they move to the world, if we got them on diets that were healthy and nutritious and were not full of the school food that we have or prepackaged things, there's study after study that show immediate healthy response. We talk about it in our next week when we talk about the RAD diet, and she was saying that woman says she has like an 85% chance of ADHD going down with a healthy diet. That's a huge metabolic indicator that food, our sensing, our body needs more. It needs more care. It needs more awareness. 2019 meta-analysis published in the International Journal of Obesity suggesting that the dopamine-driven pathways are crucial for motivation and focus in ADHD, but it leads to the heightened susceptibility to the high sugary fatty foods. Before I had my dopamine medication, that's all I ate, but I ate very little of it. I ate like that giant fatty donut on the way out the door, and then I didn't eat anything till the end of the day. I definitely know this to be true for my body. And I've contacted people that I grew up with, that I love deeply, that had obesity and was like, do you think this could be so? And the stories they told me broke my heart. It broke my heart because they were beautiful people and they have hated themselves. They have tried to control who they are and they've tried to make it and fit. And these are brilliant, amazing people who have extreme egoism and deliver for everyone else because they have such high self-loathing. And I gotta say, I see this all the way through the system. It's all those beautiful nurses, all those amazing teachers, all these people who have high cognition, they're neurodivergent, even if not recognized as such. And they might not have ADHD overtly, but they have it actually manifesting as obesity. They also have the autism spectrum disorder. They had a 2020 study. The Journal of Clinical Psychiatry highlights an increased prevalence of restrictive eating disorders, like I talked about, who have autism that is potentially fueled by sensory sensitivities. And we'll talk about this again in the next podcast, like how the mast cell is involved with this, how our POTS is involved with this. And then they had a 2017 molecular autism review that acknowledges the possibility of metabolic differences and the challenges of physical activity contributing to someone who has obesity with autism spectrum disorder. I truly feel this in my body, even though I don't have obesity. I went through these highs and lows, and the smaller my box got, you have to be restricted in what you're doing for physical, whether I was going to play in a sport or what I was going into modeling or what I was going into academic. I had to take a whole new approach to the way I ate, and it was not good. It was not healthy. It was a lot of restriction or was a lot of excess, and I was constantly falling apart. The physical falling apart affects your mental because we're so easily connected between the two because we move through the world with both of those things on full blast. They had a 2022 study, an educational review that raises a question of, does a pressure cooker of academic achievement contribute to sedentary lifestyles and unhealthy eating? My answer is yes, it totally does. Making me sit there all day hurts me. It makes me physically in pain thanks to my Ehlers-Danlos. You'll never guess what I did to help with my pain. I ate sugar. I think some people drink because every once in a while I would have some alcohol when it was really, really bad and it would get rid of it too. So I can see how you'd easily become an alcoholic. I can't drink too much though because of seizures. So I kind of had my body balancing it out, but it's not like everything isn't driving there all the time for me to be unhealthy with all of the pain I have when I'm in the system. They had a 2021 review for Frontiers in Public Health that reminds us that we had to address public obesity as a holistic approach. We can't do this like one size fits all. But what are we doing? We're getting more one size fits all. The schools are just cracking down more. They're labeling more people, they're giving more people drugs, and they're not actually addressing the environment. All of this is individualized. And this, I put it into Bard and was like, well, tell me some more. And Bard's like, oh, we need to stop having all of this stuff. And they're like addressing it like we need to change and not make people feel bad and we need to give them, but they don't actually address it like, we need to go to the system and stop this. They don't ever go and blame the system. Everything is about you taking some ownership and you fixing you. And that is everything about the 2D world. It's about you fixing you. And I think that needs to come to an immediate end. And it should be about us fixing the system. The system is going to kill us. And it's wanted to because we're the ones that are the change makers. Our sensitivity actually drives us to make change. Here I am, the embodiment of that, sitting here doing a podcast, giving this information out for free because it will require this for me to keep my sanity. I have to make this change. If you need this change too, then we need to talk because this is really, really important. Our abilities are needed. Our abilities are needed to survive as we move into the next generation, into the next era we're moving into. And you are going to be a key person for this. And we need to figure out how you move through the world and how to optimize that. Because your sensing intelligence and your cognitive intelligence should come together. And when they do is when your genius appears. And there's nothing in that in our science. They talk about consciousness. They talk about subconsciousness. I'm sorry, that stuff is wacko. That's not how it works. High intelligence is you working with your own body, surviving, just like animals do in nature. The animals we have that we've domesticated, they are overweight. They show the same things we are. If I can see it all these places around me, why are we not looking at the fact that it is the domestication that might be the issue and addressing it as a holistic thing? We aren't. We aren't because we pushed all the big picture people like me out, the big picture people like you, the high sensing people like you out. So there's nobody in there to address it because it's all 2D. So what I would like is to change that. If you find this to be true, tell me your story. Send me an email. Reach out to me. I have a free meeting you can have for the first meeting. We'll sit and talk and figure out how you move through the world because this is really important. You can be optimized. You can make your own way. We're all going to be making our own way. The system is breaking. It's cracking. It's going to get highly more restrictive. And you and I are the first ones that are going to fall out. But there's a reason for that. It happens every single time society falls because we're supposed to start a new one. And that's my goal. We're starting a new one. We're going to figure it out. And we're going to pick up everybody who's sensitive. And we will make a healthier one. This is the same cycle that's been going on through patriarchy and hierarchy for the last 3,000 years. And we're just doing it one more time. And I intend to survive. I hope this is valuable. Take care, everyone.
The views, information, and opinions expressed on this podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent Gifted ND Incorporated, Lillian Skinner, or the Gifted Neurodivergent podcast. This podcast, Lillian Skinner, and Gifted ND Incorporated are not responsible and do not verify the accuracy of the information contained in this podcast series. The primary purpose of this podcast is to inform and educate. The Gifted Neurodivergent podcast is only available for private, non-commercial use. Any other use of the information contained within this podcast must be done with express written approval and knowledge of Lillian Skinner. You may not edit, modify, or redistribute any part of this podcast. The developer assumes no liability for this podcast or its use on any other podcast or other media.